The Orange Menace is heading to court again. Donald Trump landing in Florida earlier ahead of his federal appearance in Miami. Set for tomorrow, he'll be arraigned and formally charged with 37 federal accounts for allegedly mishandling classified documents. Trump wasting no time hitting back.
In the end, they're not coming after me. They're coming after you, and I'm just standing in their way. Here I am. I'm standing in their way, and I always will be. The ridiculous and baseless indictment of me by the Biden administration's weaponized Department of Injustice will go down as among the most horrific abuses of power in the history of our country. This vicious persecution is a travesty of justice.
It's amazing watching Harold nod along with this. The media is cheering on the indictment, but are also worried that a Trump-appointed judge will crash the party.
She was selected fair and square, whether you like that or not. And the reality is, in a case like this, the public won't have confidence whether she acquits or convicts.
I haven't had this much fun reading anything since I read 50 Shades of Grey. Right? We're also dealing with a judge who has been known to give favorable, who was appointed by Trump and has been known to give favorable rulings.
The most significant evidence in the indictment, because of course I read it gleefully.
Yeah. You've said that Trump is Nixon on steroids. How so?
Nixon at least had some sense of shame.
And Obama's former wingman, Eric Holder, thinks Democrats should impeach Trump a third time if he wins.
The notion that you could have a trial, defendant be convicted, somehow win the election, be sworn in as president, or whenever it happens, that seems inconsistent with our notion of fairness, of the rule of law. At that point, I would hope that an impeachment proceeding might be considered, not only considered, brought.
Oh, can't get enough of that. Can't debate, so let's put people in court. You were upset, Judge, about the way they're painting this Trump-appointed judge. Care to elaborate?
Yes, I would love to, and I thank you for coming to me. First of all, wasn't Eric Holder held in contempt of Congress? Yeah, I thought so. But this is classic selective prosecution, Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. Now, let me be real clear on something. They want this judge gone. All right. The decision by the judge as to whether or not she will go is really a personal decision to her. It is a recusal where I and any other judge would say, I feel I can't be fair, therefore it's my call. Now, there is something called a mandatory recusal where they can prove that there is a financial benefit, that you're possibly a party, you're going to be substantially affected by the outcome. None of that is the case here. So, guys, deal with it. Now, let's talk about the fact that who is on the Southern District bench in Miami, in Florida. So you've got 5 Trump-appointed judges, and you've got 7 Clinton-Obama judges. So let's just face it. They want a Clinton-Obama judge and not a Trump-appointed judge. Those are their options, and that's the end of that. Now, let's talk about the fact that how she was chosen, there's a wheel. It's the case in every federal court. They have a wheel. They pull a name out of the hat. It's that simple. The fact that she made a ruling on Trump's behalf in another case is irrelevant. All right, so let's talk about what we've got here. We've got a case that is not only going to impact, the prosecution. It will show the political nature of this prosecutor Smith. They want to get rid of the judge. I think we should get rid of the prosecutor Smith. Smith is a guy who has been rejected by the Supreme Court in an 8-0 decision that I talked about before in his prosecution, overreaching prosecution of a governor in Maryland, and the Edwards case where a jury rejected his political stances. So he's unethical beyond in terms of the court's response to him and jury's responses to him. Judges have turned against him and courts have turned against him. And let me make one more thing clear. He is a special counsel. He is not a special prosecutor. Therefore, everything he does has to be approved by Merrick Garland. He works under Merrick Garland. And finally, let me say, why are they so afraid of this guy? There is no evidence that Trump destroyed or gave away classified information. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Hillary. We know that James Comey said that her evidence was hacked by other countries.
Dana, anything else?
Well, not a ton. I think that there's 2 things, too. But there's a legal defense, which we will finally learn more about tomorrow after he appears. And then there's the political defense, We know what the political defense is, and President Trump is not shy about it. He's talked about it all weekend. He is getting other Republicans to defend him, and he's just basically going to go full bore. And he'll give his statement tomorrow. What's very interesting at this point, and Sean Hannity asked Governor Gavin Newsom about this.
That's
Governor, is the issue, for example, of homelessness, crime, liberty, education. And you talked about how 80% of people want to have a debate. They want to have a debate about like those big issues, but this issue, just because you can prosecute, should you prosecute? But that's also water under the bridge too, because now it's actually happening. Previous people who've been in this position have pled down to a misdemeanor and moved on. I seriously doubt that will happen tomorrow. So we'll have to wait and see, and then he's going to speak to the nation after that.
So, Harold, you said during the break, this is much ado about nothing. I can't believe that they would try to target a beloved folk hero that has changed so many lives. Care to elaborate on that, what you said? And you're going to deny it.
Slightly different recollection.
I have the tape right here.
So I'd say a couple of things. I agree with the judge in one regard. The judge is fit to serve down there, this judge here. And if she proves that she's not, then I'm sure the parties there will say otherwise. Two, I differ with the judge when we talk about this judge here when we talk about judges, because I think we're reaching a dangerous point in the country where we think if you're a Democrat, the only way you can have a fair trial or be treated fairly in a courtroom is if the judge is appointed by a Democrat and vice versa. And the other side, I don't know if you meant to make that point, but I think that some are making this point a lot. What I can't figure out, and I hear the comparisons with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and others, and I watched Bill Barr this weekend on Sunday, who's been a great defender of the presidents, but was not a defender of President Trump on Sunday. The difference, I think, between the cases with the Clintons and everyone else, when President Trump was asked on one or two occasions to return these documents, he chose not to. Now, he claims, I think the legal predicate of this case is that President Trump believes that he's entitled to these documents because they're governed under the Presidential Records Act. And Mr. Smith, who, if he's a bad lawyer, then if he indicted me, I'd want him because that means we can beat him. But if he's a bad lawyer, he believes, or should say his theory of the case is that this is an espionage thing. But at the root of it, had the president, I think President Trump just returned the documents after they asked him the third time, we wouldn't be facing this. And I don't wish this on him. I think people saying the things that they're saying they enjoyed to read. I never enjoy to read about anyone being indicted unless they've killed somebody. And don't get me wrong, what the president, what he's accused of is bad, but I don't pile on people like that. I get people who do, but I don't do that. But I hope the president answers the question in the courtroom when he finally gets before the 12 jurors. Why didn't you return the papers when you were asked to?
Well, he was sifting through them and determining what were personal and what were presidential. And under the Presidential Records Act, as you know, Harold, he has the sole discretion to do that.
Even when he showed it to that reporter?
Well, if you're waving it to that reporter who's an American, how is that different than Hillary's server getting hacked? The DNC server getting hacked, the Obama administration getting hacked. He put American national security at risk because he went like that in front of an American. Meanwhile,
we'll see.
Joe Biden spread eagle all over the mid-Atlantic in Chinatown. He's got his garage wide open while Hunter's flying in with drunk Chinese spies. Come on, Espionage Act, President. He didn't even start a single war. He wiped ISIS off the map. He put national security at risk, espionage. Chinese are lining the Biden family pockets. Harold Ford Jr., you're better than that. This is death by accusation. First, he's a colluding traitor. Then he's a rapist. And then he's a Nazi. And now he's throwing papers all over the Middle East for cash. They'll put him on trial. They'll leak. They'll smear. They don't even care how this thing is adjudicated. It doesn't matter. They're scaring away donors and swing voters. Republicans need to get their act together, and they better circle the wagons. If he had cocaine in those boxes that were stacked up in the ballroom, then maybe if he's running a cocaine ring out of Mar-a-Lago, maybe they don't circle the wagons.
Joe could send Hunter to check that out.
Exactly. But he's not. This is about, remember Allen Iverson? We're talking about practice. We're talking about a piece of paper.
A military map.
We're talking about a piece of paper, Harold Ford Jr. Biden gets caught red-handed with Chinese bribes. 9 members of his family. But you know what the Democrats do? They circle the wagons. They redefine what a bribe is. You can bribe an entire family with cash, diamonds, and gifts. But if it doesn't hit Joe's bank account, it's not a bribe. Come on, Harold Ford Jr. He's treated like an enemy combatant. They take away attorney-client privilege. And then they're upset because people might get upset in Miami. Yeah, people are upset. I like the fact that he's promising to appoint a special counsel and sick him on Biden if he's elected.
Why do you think he can't keep a lawyer?
The move.
Why can't he keep a lawyer? Why do all the lawyers keep resigning?
Well, that's a good question, but we got to go to break.
Yeah. Well, I think you learned something here, Harold Ford Jr.
Yes.
Nothing. You learned nothing here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.